Yes, hello everybody. This is Martin Gudel and from Hamburg in Germany. Um, I'm glad you joined this session about how to create your personal bot assistants by using the Microsoft Bot Framework Composer. In the next about 50 minutes, we'll do a little Bot Framework Composer primer. So you will know about what's in for you in the Bot Framework Composer, what is it, what is the bot anyway, and how can you create your first dialogues. Yeah, first of all, I hope you had a good time so far, and don't forget to join the SharePoint Saturday in Warsaw on September 12th. I guess as they will celebrate the 5th anniversary, there will be a lot of party and drinks and beer and a lot of stuff around on the SharePoint platform. And once again, let's say thank you to the sponsors and partners. You know, without them, nothing would be possible. And now that we know about the event, let's get a little bit more familiar with me. My name is Martin Gudel. I'm working as a Microsoft Cloud Platform consultant at a company called Kramer & Crew here in Hamburg in Germany. When you provide the slide deck later, you'll find some contact details here. And I am typically talking about the Microsoft 365 collaboration, including Teams on the apps and services side, not too much about the phone and voice features, and about Azure Cognitive Services and machine learning. And this is what leads to our today's topic, where we talk about intelligence for the Microsoft Teams apps, including your personal bot assistant. And to do that, we first are going to check for what is a bot anyway, what is the bot framework composer, what do we need to have it running, and how do we start to create our first bot, including some simple dialogue actions and activities. In the second part, we will check how to deploy our bot to the Azure bot app and implement it in our website. And at the end, we will check for some final recommendations from my side, what to do and what not to do when deploying your bot. And that's again for today. So let's dive in. What is a bot? From the user side, a bot is displayed most of the time as some kind of conversation, like a question and an answer, and that's it. You know it all when you use WhatsApp or Microsoft Teams. You can enter some comments to a chat box on a one-on-one chat with something that responds to you. This can be another person or another machine that just responds to your message. When you do so, and when you go a bit deeper on it, at first we start our tool, and this tells the tool to just connect to your conversation service at your bot, and it responds with a connection to that, and in the second step, it will post to some conversation update about your current status and so on, so you can join to your bot. And once this initial dialogue is done, you can start to send and receive messages and do it again and again and again. And a bot, in difference to a human conversation, is represented by short specific activities where you have a request and a response in a text form. In a text form in this way may also contain things like buttons or pictures or cards that are included in your response. And so you still have a request and a response action based on the text you're typing. If you look at the Microsoft Teams client, you join your Teams mobile client, for example, where you can do several activities like authentication to Microsoft Teams and to the conversation. And from that point on, when you connect to a bot as the conversation partner, you connect to your bot application, and this one will magically connect to your custom bot infrastructure. This is where your bot, your own programming part lives. And from this point on, you can start to handle the user input with your custom activity. When we are talking about bot framework composer, we are talking about several single parts in your environment. Basically, you need the bot framework emulator from the bot framework to test your bot. Later, once you develop some core functionality and to have your bot running, you need some .NET Core SDK in the version currently specified. In the requirements. So you can, right now it's version 3.1, and to run the bot framework calls, you need to install PowerShell Core, for example, version 7, which is the current stable version. You need to have some Azure CLI for deploying your bot to Azure, and you need some runtime about the JavaScript for deploying and running your bot. And at the top of it, you need a browser. In my case, I strongly recommend to choose Google Chrome. Chromium-based Edge is fine as well. So you can interact with the bot framework composer as user interface itself. And once you finished developing your bot that way, you can you need some Visual Studio Code or other code editor, so you can edit the C# code that is created by the bot framework emulator manually. You can download the bot framework composer from the GitHub. I just put this to my slide for later guidance on how to go. In our project, we'll start with the localhost 3000 at the below, and now we will check what's in for you when using the bot framework composer. So for this, we go and run PowerShell Core, and I downloaded the clone from GitHub earlier, so now we have a bot framework composer folder here, and as you can see, I already used bot framework composer for several activities. So we have some folders about who is the bots created earlier here at the bottom, and when we need to start bot framework composer, we change to the folder where our bot framework composer repository is cloned, and there we will find a directory called composer. And at this point, you can see that's a John repository, so you can just go and type John start all, and now John will do all the magic that is required to run our user interface, and hopefully, yes, here there is. It will tell us that we can reach out for bot framework composer at the localhost port 3000. Let's do this. And ta-da, here is bot framework composer. If you never used bot framework composer before, you will just see this dialog starting with the home button, and a new button, you won't have any history like this one or some bots I created before. This is the same bots to choose from that I showed you before in the PowerShell folders. But for now, let's start to create our first new bot. And as we don't have any rabbit in the head, let's go and create it from scratch. So we give it a name. And a description. We tell it where to store the files that we need to find later once we developed our initial dialogues here, and click next. And now we got an empty bot that shows our first project in Bot Framework Composers, and that screen is as followed. At the top here at the left, we find the main dialog for our initial bot, so it's called main, and we already have some dialog here that is called greeting. We have some buttons to create new triggers and new dialogues for our bots, while on the other hand, whatever is shown here in the middle is our current conversation flow, and on the right hand side is the current start of what is shown in the middle. Now that we can see the greeting flow, for example, we have some boxes, and it explains what activity can be done here and what is the thing to do here. But as I mentioned earlier, we don't have any rabbit in our head. So let's start with an empty greeting, and the very first message you typically choose to present to users some kind of hello user and great to see you here. So let's do this. For this, in there is a plus similar to what you know from Visio or Microsoft Power Automate, where you can start to get your actions. For example, you can send a response, just send out simple text to a user. You can ask it user questions and try to get a response in a specific data type, or login information, or a file if you need to receive a file. You can do some branching, like if then else, or loops if you need to do some dialogues and again and again and again. You can manage your dialogues, because you not only need to start with our main dialogue that we got created initially, but we can, if you have larger conversations, potentially we run into, okay, let's talk about a custom form, so we can create a separate dialogue for a form. We won't deal with this today, but we can just create a custom form and run through this complex form in a separate dialogue. We can manage some current states on our conversation or user dialogue, and really interesting, we can try to get access to external resources just by sending requests and getting response from an API you are able to access, or we just can try to log in to some authentication like Azure ID. But for now, let's just show how you can do some basic dialogues, and for this we just start with sending out a simple response like hello user. And if I go to this text box, you will notice this dash here at the left. That dash is, if I enter a text response, this dash represents a single line of response. So this answer will represent a greeting or a text called hello. in the same, and I can have multiple from like this. So the bot will not always tell the user hello, but at one time it will tell the user hello. On the other hand, it will a random result. It may result in hello user. And now you can start to generate your custom response like great to see you today. And this is already a basic response to a user, and to have that basic functionality of bot framework composer ready. Let's try to start our very simple bot we now created. This can be done by starting the bot at the upper right corner here. We're starting a bot, and once it is started, now it's compiled and deployed to a web server in the behind. And if it's ready to get tested, it will show a button here, so you can test it very easy in the bot framework emulator. So let's get it started here. So now we get our bot framework emulator window here, and here's the conversation stream, and if we start the conversation, you can see the text hello here at the bottom. This is the only activity our bot can do right now. Whatever we type now, the bot doesn't do anything because we didn't tell our bot what to do with all this activity, this request we sent to our bot. But basic functionality is already there, so we're good to go to develop the next dialogues to our bot. So once we have a greeting and we have a response to a user, as you can see, our bot will receive the hello string represented here. It will take one of these responses, but it is not able to respond to any user input. And it's a good idea to tell a user about if a user sends some request to our bot, it's a good idea to send something back about, hey, I know what to do with your user input, or no, I don't know what to do with the message you sent me. So let's add some response to whatever the user tells our bot. And the very first message I suggest to implement is to create a new activity. This responds to, I can't do that. I don't know what to do here. So to do that, we can create a new trigger here at the left. So if we click new trigger, it asks us what is the type of trigger to react on, and there's a lot of. There's an intent that may be recognized, something where we define on this or that content of the message, do this or that activity. We have some unknown intent. I didn't implement any activity for this specific message. Let's respond with some proper message so the user will know the bot didn't understand. We can have some additional dialogue events, so we can fork into sub-dialogues from here. We can try to do some activity by our bot. For example, if you enter deploy a software package to a machine, maybe you can assign it in Microsoft Intune now, so you can just chat in Teams to deploy your packages, and you can do several other actions. Let's start with the unknown intent for now, because we won't implement a lot of functionality in this session today. but we want to let the user know that this dialog is not implemented and we don't know what to do. So let's do this. And now you can see here next to the greeting at the left, there is the unknown intent. And once again, we can just send out a simple response for now, where we can see, let's do something like, so we can just prompt with a message, oh, I don't know what to do with your input. You need to check something else to get your activity done. And and now to get this change with the second dialog into place, you need to restart your bot so it can recompile and redeploy it. And once this is done, we now once again can open it in the bot framework emulator. And now you can see our greeting is still there. When we join the conversation, it still says hello user. And now if we respond with a message, it tries to explain us, I don't know what to do with your input. Maybe you should try something else. And that way we will try to create our dialogues with an initial prompt, with a user input, and a response that is the reaction of that the bot reacts or whatever we tell it to do. This is a basic activity that we can do, and based on this, now we can get a little bit more complex. For example, when we try to create our trigger, I said, we have some unknown intent, we have some general greeting in place. Maybe we want to react based on some intent. For example, we want to ask our bot about stock exchange, or we want to request a picture, like from the message extension at the below of the message bar in Microsoft Teams, where you have a smiley bar, and this is a message that sends I request your a list of smileys, emojis from the Microsoft Teams, and it will answer with a long list of smileys where you can just click the proper image to include it into your message. For this, I created a bot earlier. Let's try to choose this one. And this one is called Thomas. So Thomas likes to talk about the weather, for example. And if you so we still have that greeting in place. In this case, we have our initial greeting at the one line. You can find it with the dash in front, and we have a new line with a dash that is an alternative greeting with a second line, and we still have our unknown intent that tells the user, I don't know what to do with your user input. And then what did I do? I went back to the main dialog from our bot, and there is at that place there are several intents we can create. So we can create intents to our main dialog, describe it at the blade at the right. And once this is done, we go back to the left, create a new trigger based on our intent and add some activity about what needs to happen when we detect this intent in your message. Let's do this for now. There is different types of recognizers for your message. We can choose no recognizer, so we really need to have a command-based bot where we exactly need to type the text that is requested as our intent here at the intent side. We can include Lewis for language understanding, but we won't go deep for Lewis in this session because Lewis needs some additional explanation. Or very simple, most of you are familiar with regular expression detection, and we choose a really simple regular expression here, and whatever we do here, we can just say, hey, let's have an intent, for example, for the weather. And how do we know we want to talk about the weather? We need to paste text pattern here. So now you can use any complex regular expression. For now, we will just create some text phrase here, and you can see I don't care for the W at the beginning because if I create an uppercase character here, it won't match a lowercase, so I just start with what comes behind that. So I have a weather text to include in our message, and once it and this will detect for the weather intent. If so, we can create a new trigger, and this time it will be intent recognized. And when we, I'm sorry, I need to press enter here. So now you can see it here in a line. So it's really there. And now when I create a new trigger, it can be intent recognized, and now it will provide a list of all that intents I include on the right hand side. So for now there's only one. Let's choose this weather intent. I won't choose it right now for real because I already did some at this point. And here's our weather intent. That's what comes up if I press OK in the dialog before. And now there's once again that plus during our flow to add activities. The very first activity is to tell the user, always tell the user, hey, you did this or that. I understood you want to do something like talking about the weather. So we prompt the user, okay, we know you want to talk about this intent. That's fine. And then we click once again, click at the plus sign. And this time we want to ask the user a question because weather depends on your location. So we expect the user to enter some text input, and this one will result in a text input. So the bot asks a question, and the user is expected to respond with a response. And as you can see, as I click here at the right-hand side to what is the bot ask, it goes to the first activity. And if I go to the user input, it goes to the second activity here. So we can ask a user a question. For example, weather depends on a location. So what's your location anyway? And this is just sent out to the user. And when done, the bot awaits a response from the user that is taken as user input. And as user input, we need some place to store our result, that what the user now sends back to us, and we store it in a property called my place. And please take a note of the $ sign here at the front. That is this one is a mark. Is a mark for the bot framework that this is a variable. If you won't take this $sign, it won't detect it in some cases. That this is the variable you want to evaluate, and not a type of text that you need to get for processing. So now we will ask our user a question. We will receive a response to it and store it in the my place. So now we know about the location where the user is, and at that point we maybe still send out the user a prompt. So you're in this location, and once again we'll start with a dash for the first choice of response, and there is a text we type in, and now you can see how to reference to our variable. You can see the variable is placed into the curly braces here, and we do some reference to our variable to evaluate what's in it. For now, to replace this one with the value of the variable, and maybe we should add some additional text on it. That's just a string concatenation with an evaluated string. So the user will know, okay, we understood what he wants to do, where he is, and we tell him what is next for our bot to do. And what is next? For example, when we talk about the weather, it would be great if we also receive something about how is the weather at that location where the user is. And for this, we try to access an external resource. For example, a common weather API is the Open Weather Map API, and as I'm located in Hamburg, you now can see the syntax for this. There is a placeholder for the location that's now highlighted. Let's type it the right way. So we have a query value here for the location, and if we just send this out, we will get a response as a JSON. And at that point, hold on a second. Yes, here we go. Check our response and make it a bit more readable. We get a record with some properties, and for example, if we want to know about the weather, we need to go down to this property here called weather, and you can see here there is an array inside where we get only one item here, so it's item 0, and this one contains a description about how is the weather in Hamburg, and at that point we want to present the user. Okay, we understood you want to talk about the weather, and let's respond with the current state of the weather in Hamburg. So, and as you can see, I was able to do this in a browser. I didn't use Postman for this example. So this is a simple GET request we can fire up to the API. So let's choose the proper HTTP method here and paste the query URL. Here, I didn't choose Microsoft Graph for now, but it works the same as Microsoft Graph needs some additional preparation. But I guess the weather API will we'll do it the same for the basic principles of how things work. You know, we only pasted the URI. If we need to paste the body, you can construct it here as well. And now we get a response, and once again, we need a place where to store the response for what comes back in the JSON. And for this, we at the below here, at the blade at the left, right, we choose JSON from here, and we once again define a property where to store our current value. In my case, it's just called it weather. So now we will send out the request to our API. We'll receive the JSON response, and we put it into $weather. And at a final step, we just want a user to present. We just want to present our result to the user. So we say, once again, in our location, the weather is, and now there's an expression containing our variable. And what is really important to know, I think the documentation on the bot framework composer page is not really clear for a beginner to read this out. There's a request and a response inside this weather, and there is content on what is the response. So you need to add the content property here, and then you can start with the structure of our JSON. There was a token called weather, and this one was an array, so we need item 0, and in item 0 there was a property called description, and this is what we need to evaluate here. So once again, we need that property and run some evaluation as we do it by the add curly brace property curly brace here, and this is how we just can handle simple user input, do some activity, and represent a result for that activity. And once again, as we need to restart our bot to test it out. So, and if we do so, it still sends out a greeting for us. So my expression was to talk about the weather. Let's talk about the weather. So it will recognize, you want to talk about the weather, fine, what's your current location? Let's say we are in Warsaw, and then it will go for the weather in Warsaw, querying our API, and you can see it here very step by step, and obviously it's cluttered clouds in the result. And if you take a note of this dialog right here in the bot framework composer, you can also see several more details about what's going on in your environments. That's really helpful for debugging. What is the dialogue? If you remember the picture at the initial slide I showed you about what's going on, what did the bot send, what did you send, what did the bot do, what did it respond, and you can trace it based on this information. So it's really easy to keep track with what your bot is doing. And now we could start another activity here, but for now that's all. And now that we created our first bot, we go back to the PowerShell. And yes, you can see here the web server prompts with all the URLs that we called from the beginning of our bot activity. So you can also have this representation of what the bot's doing. But let's cancel it for now. because now that we have created our first bot, we have a new folder. For example, we created the Martin's bot. Here, in our demo, I showed you the Thomas bot, but let's take the Martin's bot for now. And you can see it's created here. So let's check out what's inside. And we have a default structure of some composer dialogues. We have some controllers in our bot. So this is a really basic structure for the pattern that's created from the bot framework that represents your bot. And if we go and check out what's in it, you find your composer dialogues here, and you can find the main dialogue, for example, and in the dialogues where there is the main dialogue, and you can see a JSON representation of what you did in the bot. So here is the, for example, here is the intent. If you call the intent, there is some actions about the sender activity and the activities to receive user input. And in the next files, there is a text. There is the text messages you entered at the right about what the bot needs to answer or what it needs to write. And this one is really useful in case you need to change it later just by replacing the text instead going through the dialogues all the time. And we also have a bot controller as well, so you can still go and add your custom code if you feel like, okay, now I created my dialogues. Let's go a little bit more in depth and create my own logic and some additional structure that's not able to get via the bot framework composer. So you can just go to the code and create your own activities that cannot be reached via bot framework composer. If you notice the directories, there is a folder scripts, and this one contains two special scripts, create and deploy. The first one is if you need to deploy your bot to a bot framework, you can just create your resources at the initial deployment, and then it will create the Azure resource group for this and deploy your bot to that resource group. And this looks like followed. Go to the Azure portal. I won't run this deployment in the session because it takes a little time. And there it is. For example, I did it earlier with the Thomas bot, and now it will create some bot channel registration and your and all the resources is required to run your bot. And when you go to your now you can go and test your bot. We already did it in the emulator, but here also you can do it in a web chat. When done, you can publish it to your final resources and connect by using channels. And this is where it gets interesting for this basic primer, because when you go to the channel, you'll find configuration how you add it to Teams or to deploy it to your website or, for example, to Cortana. So your bot where you wrote your message in text, for example, can get speech recognition and speech response without doing any additional things here. And let's start with our web chat here. For example, so you will get an impression about what's in for you. You can create some access keys to access to your bot at this point, and okay. Okay. Let's try it again. Okay. Not going to work here. So you can get secrets to reference to your bot and to access your bot. So your bot is secure secured with your access key. So if you, for example, deploy to teams, other people with other teams are unable to connect here. And yes, okay, you can still test it in the web chat. This looks very similar to what is shown in the bot framework composer. And so, that way, basically, you can deploy your bot to your website. And from this point on, you can go to and deploy it to your site, to your Microsoft Teams, just by choosing that very easy way by going to the channels and click that the buttons here. Okay, let's go back because I'm running out of time. So we did it. Yeah. What is bot framework composer good for? If as you saw, we can easily create simple dialogues or even more complex dialogues. I just kept it simple for now with some basic activity, so you have an impression for what's in it for you. But I feel like you still need some additional API to access, for example, to access Microsoft Graph and Office 365 resources. So your bot will respond with more information like, hey, the weather in Warsaw is somewhat cloudy. And when you go through the bot framework composer dialogues, you will know that it's not really easy to break down your complex questions to simple dialogues. At that point, I recommend to choose to choose forms to fill out from the paper workflow to break it down to bot framework composer flows for dialogues. This is really simple to adopt because the forms typically have, hey, if you write that value in the one property, go to the other property and write that value as well, and your bot can make this kind of form flow more easy, as it just guides you through your complex form. So you can only you can make it more easy to just request the questions he's really faced with, and just drop all the other properties he doesn't need to fill. And yeah, as you saw, sometimes bot framework composer no, the bot framework emulator showed us a dialog that didn't respond initially, so you need to reload it in the current state of bot framework composer. I guess this is part of the preview part when you go to the GitHub repository, and once they finish the preview, then this issue is gone. And what I strongly recommend you to check for if you receive updates from the GitHub, double check the proper version of .NET Core installed on your machine. If you won't check it, I promise you dialogues will crash. So always read the documentation and install the proper version of .NET Core. Don't trust that the current installed version of .NET Core, once you do an update, Jan will update your bot framework composer automatically, but it won't update your .NET Core, of course. So double check for the proper version of .NET Core. Yeah. I hope this is interesting for you guys and girls. So you know about what is in Bot Framework Composer for you and what it's good for and how you start to create your first easy bot. I personally think it's a good way to start to create simple flows. Are there any questions in the chat?
No questions yet.
No questions. So either you didn't have any questions, everything is crystal clear, or some of you are already looking for the afternoon beer following up in the next session at your home. Yeah, if you feel like, I told you something in the session that you want to come back, just drop me a mail. You can find it on the slides I will publish during the next minutes via Twitter, and I posted for Thomas and Edit as well. And yes, hope you found it interesting. Thank you for your time. Don't forget to fill out the feedback form for our SharePoint Saturday Warsaw Online Edition. And yes, thank you for joining us today. And don't forget to meet us on September 12th.
Thank you very much, Martin, for the presentation. Thank you.